Hello everyone, Namaste and welcome to F1 India's global podcast. I'm your host Akash and today we'll be looking into the British Grand Prix. So without much further ado, let's get down to it. The British Grand Prix was the fourth race on the calendar and was the second circuit to hold two back-to-back races for Formula 1. The temperature was high on an average and was missing the more common rainy vibes of England as the race was being held much later than normal. One more uncommon thing we saw during the race was the absence of the fans on the stand. Now I know I've written about it before as well, but Silverstone really has a different vibe with their fans cheering their hearts out for their favorite teams and the colored dust that is splashed throughout the grandstand. But nonetheless, this race was thrilling to watch and the last few laps really gave us the money's worth of drama. The track was quite windy as well and posed a real hurdle for the drivers to manage their cars on the track. One unfortunate thing was that Sergio Perez was tested positive for the coronavirus and had to retire from both the British Grand Prix and possibly from the other races as well, if he doesn't have a complete recovery. Nico Hülkenberg is taking his place for the foreseeable future. Perez has to remain in quarantine for a minimum of 10 days as mandated by the FIA till testing negative. All our prayers with him and hope that he has a speedy recovery through this situation. Free practice. The free practices on the whole was off to a bad start. That's because the temperatures on Friday was really high and nowhere near the predicted Sunday temperatures. There was almost a difference of 10 degrees Celsius between Friday and Sunday. This meant that whatever data they were pulling on the Friday session had little or no use for the Sunday race. But that didn't mean that the teams would be reluctant in collecting the data from the current situation. Everyone was out and tested their cars apart from Vettel. He had to sit out the entire session due to a problem in the intercooler. This meant that he was getting lesser and lesser time to get comfortable with the SF1000. The FP2 session wasn't much of a help either as the track temperatures soared even higher. There were a lot of cars spinning and losing balance on the track as they tried to counter the challenges of the high heat and the wind. Both the Red Bull drivers were complaining about the understeer problem of the RB16. This meant that they still haven't understood the RB16 package on the whole. The racing point seemed steady with Hülkenberg not too far off from the pace of Stroll. This was quite a feat since the entire car was built around the specifications of Perez and him hopping into the car just a day before meant he hadn't got much to be prepared about. His race fitness was also in question along with his neck strength because of the G-force that the cars pull on the track. The race had to be red flagged in the middle with Albon having a massive crash as he lost control and slid over to the barriers. This showed the level of comfort he had with the Red Bull car. The second practice didn't bode well for Sebastian Vettel yet again. He had to come back into the pits due to a loose brake pedal. He sat out the remainder of the session. Renault had finally come to the game with their own version of the boomerang bargeboard design. This showed their willingness to perform better and not just complain about the others. Spoiler alert, they protest the Racing Point's brake ducts yet again. FP3 saw Albon struggling with an issue in the energy recovery system or ERS. His race engineer was also changed to Simon Rennie, who is much more experienced and has helped a lot of past famous Red Bull drivers. This was an attempt to ease up the pressure on Albon after his disappointing start to the season. Now it's up to Albon to tap into the vast knowledge that Rennie brings on the table and get the best out of the car. Kvyat had a 5-place grid penalty after he had to swap his gearbox. Qualifying. The qualifying round happened on a relatively cooler day than Friday. This meant that the drivers had a little bit of breathing space on the tire performance part. The air temperature was around 22 degrees Celsius, while the track temperature was around 38 degrees Celsius. Even though the Ferraris are really off pace this season, they showed relatively decent lap times only when it came to Charles Leclerc. They managed to nail the car setup according to Charles' requirement and he got decent lap times out of it. He managed to finish P4 in the end, giving Ferrari a good place to start from. Sebastian Vettel on the other hand was struggling throughout the qualifying session. He did manage to get into Q3 this time but only qualified P10. It was good to see both the Renaults making it into the third round. They did show good pace in the practice sessions and had managed to put themselves in a solid place to start their race. They were going to start from P8 and P9 respectively for Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon. The Racing Points tried to put up a good show but had failed to show the magic that they had shown in Hungary. It was expected of them to do better on this track since they copied the Mercedes car philosophy and Mercedes tends to do well on this track. But that didn't reciprocate from the common sense into the real world. Hülkenberg was out in the Q2 session, which was understandable, but Lance Stroll struggled to show the car's dominance on the track and managed to be outdone by young gun Lando Norris at the end of Q3. Stroll went on to secure P6. Speaking of Lando Norris with an S, he was on fire for the McLaren team this weekend. He was showing solid pace for the practice session and managed to place his MCL 35 on the 5th position. Sainz also unlocked the potential of his car and earned a much-deserved P7. The two McLarens were split by the racing point of Lance Stroll. Lando Norris is really a fan's favorite as he was wearing the race helmet designed by a 6-year-old. It was a really cute helmet and it showed how much Lando cared about his fans. Coming to the team of the hour, it was really going sketchy for one half of the garage, whereas Valtteri Bottas was on top of the table for the first two qualifying sessions. It really looked as if he was going to take pole again this year. Lewis was really struggling to put a lap together and he also spun out during the Q2 session. He managed to bring out the red flag after the spin and looked as if he was under a lot of real pressure. But he managed to wake up his inner beast up in Q3 and ended up taking his 91st pole position of his career by beating the Finnish driver with a margin of 0.3 of a second. Truly a masterclass from a legend in making. Lastly, the Red Bulls were really all over the pace, with Max Verstappen trying his heart out to come relatively closer to the Mercedes, but eventually not being able to bring them any closer. The Q3 timings of the Red Bull is slower than the Q2 timings of Bottas. Need I say anything else? Moreover, Alex Albon was really struggling on the RB16 and unfortunately saw him being shown the door at Q2. This was quite damaging for the driver and it was up to the team to bring the potential out of the car and the driver together. Rest we have to see as the season progresses through the pandemic era. Race. The lights out and away we went on one of the oldest circuits in the F1 calendar. It's hosting the F1 races since 1950. The track temperature was quite low when compared to Friday. This meant that the tire degradation was not going to be much of an issue, but boy were we wrong. But even though this race was a little boring in the middle, it made its money's worth in the last 3 laps of the race. The race didn't have to go on much long to cause an accident. On lap 2, Alex tried to cut on the inside of Magnussen and ended up banging wheels, which sent the Haas car flying into the barriers.
Here's Alex Albon on the inside of Kevin Magnussen. Have they touched? Oh, yes, they have.
Because he hit a lot of curb.
It was a 50-50 chance and the move was quite edgy on Albon's part. He later went on to receive a 5-second penalty for the incident which dropped him down the order. This was really demoralizing for him, but he kept his head down. He kept his cool throughout the race and finally got the car into P8 by the end. Speaking of Red Bull, we have to talk about Max's lonely race. He was in P3 most of his race, with Bottas around 8 seconds ahead of him and Charles about 20 odd seconds behind him. He was so bored maintaining his pace that he asked his race engineer to even drink water and hydrate in the middle.
Remember to drink, remember to drink. Thank you.
A huge turn of events happened at the end of the race, but we will discuss that separately in the end. The safety car was bought out by Albon and had went into the pits on lap 6, only to be bought out again by Danny Kvyat in lap 13. He was a little distracted playing with the switches in the car as it went into maggots, lost his rear on the curbs and went in sliding. He came out uninjured from the incident but was quite disappointed on how the race unfolded. The truth behind this is his right rear had actually deflated going into maggots, which was the reason why he lost the car. Gasly had a pretty decent race on the whole. He didn't put a step wrong in the race and managed to put himself in front of a Ferrari and a Racing Point to finish P7. A very mature drive by him and got the 6 crucial points that his team needed. Speaking of Racing Points, it was really unfortunate to see Hülkenberg in the sidelines. He was much anticipated for the race but had to retire as his car went into some technical problems. His luck was quite unfortunate, but it bummed out a lot of F1 fans around the world. Lance Stroll was really struggling to move through the packed midfield that we saw in the race. There was almost a train that had formed in the midfield. The dominance that the car showed in Hungary was really torn apart as the race progressed. The reason may be that since they copied the Mercedes design so accurately, they managed to pick up their flaws as well. We know that the Mercedes had a problem in trailing a car, or rather moving in the dirty air. This may have been the key problem as they were stuck in the DRS train for most of the race. This meant that they couldn't back off from the train to get some smooth air, and neither could they push forward to make a move. Stroll ended up in P9 and picked up 2 points for the team. McLarens were showing some really good pace throughout the race and were a dominating team in the midfield. They were on point with the strategy and both the drivers weren't putting a foot wrong throughout the race. Lando was really aggressive and charged Daniel Ricciardo and eventually had to lose the spot to him. He ended up in P5 after an amazing race. Where was Sainz, you ask? Just wait till the end and find out. The Renaults had an amazing race with Ricciardo managing to finish P4 and Ocon finishing in P6. They were caught up in the DRS train for most of the race, but were still managing to show a good pace. Maybe the bargeboard updates that they bought really helped them. A stunning drive by Daniel Ricciardo as he managed to get past Lando Norris in the dying moments of the race and got Renault one of the best finishes in ages. Both the drivers managed a veteran drive without the team or themselves putting a wrong foot in the race. Ferraris were trying their best to remain positive throughout the race, but their lack of pace was really evident when the gap between Verstappen and Leclerc was around 23 seconds at one point. That huge a gap wasn't expected by the viewers or the Ferrari fans, but as luck would help them, Leclerc managed to hold on to his nerves and ended up in P3. Sebastian Vettel started in P10 and somehow managed to end up in P10 as well. The broken connection between him and the team really was showing on the track at the moment. Now the moment that made the entire British Grand Prix light up. It started with the Mercedes team. They were racing on their own planets throughout the race. They had a decent gap from the rest of the field and were quite untouchable with the experienced drivers on the seats. It was all dull till the end, but with 3 laps to go, something changed. Bottas had a tire failure out of the blue and dropped like a fly through the order. This was a sudden tire failure and it happened at the first half of the track.
Now what's happened to Valtteri Bottas? He's gone wide and now Max Verstappen, he has passed Valtteri Bottas for second place and that front wing looks damaged.
It's more than a puncture.
This meant that he had to limp his way through the field, get to the pits where the crew were waiting for him to put up a set of softs. Verstappen took the advantage, overtook him and decided to pit for a set of softs to get the fastest lap of the race. But as he decided to go through with this plan, Lewis's front tire decided to give up on him on the last lap. Lewis somehow wrestled the car and got the car back over the finish line with Verstappen only 5.856 seconds behind him.
And that is Lewis Hamilton. Look at the state of that Mercedes car. This is now Lewis Hamilton praying that the checkered flag comes as soon as is humanly possible.
According to Lewis, the tire gave up on him without a warning and he was in no mood to stop because of that. Verstappen tried to push really hard to catch Lewis, but in the end, the stars were shining on Lewis's side of the garage.
Hamilton, the checkered flag will come in the nick of time for a 7th British Grand Prix victory and a record 7th British Grand Prix victory for the most wins at home. It's Lewis Hamilton who
That's not all. In the last lap, Sainz had a similar tire failure which sent him all the way down to P13. It was really hard to watch because he was really strong throughout the race and was much deserving of the P4 position. What I can't sleep on is what if Verstappen didn't go into the pits for the fastest lap and had been out till the end of the race. We should have seen a new race winner for a change. So guys, that was it from the British Grand Prix. If you want a poetic analysis of this race, go into YouTube and search for F1 India. It should be out very soon. Thank you so much for listening and we'll meet you next week for the 70th anniversary in Silverstone. Thank you so much.